I'm completely in shock. No warning, no announcement, no nothing. I've been scouring the news, but everything is silent. I left my apartment last night to go for a nighttime run to clear my head. The streets have been practically deserted since the outbreak, and it was very unnerving to me to run in empty streets in the middle of the day. At least at night everyone was supposed to be inside, I reasoned. I exited the apartment and jogged to the end of the road. It was unusually dark since all the late-night chicken restaurants had closed once the outbreak started to get serious. The first thing that struck me as strange was a new CCTV installation at the intersection. It turned to follow me as I went by. I just thought, when the hell was that put in? I racked my brain, trying to remember if I had seen it that morning when I went to go shopping, but I was almost sure that it wasn't there earlier. Of course, the real surprise was when I turned the corner. There it was, a huge, enormous wall. I stopped dead in my tracks. I blinked a few times, sure that I must be dreaming. This is the stuff of dystopian novels, right? There's no way it could happen in the real world, right? Fuck me. If they could build the Berlin Wall in the 60s, of course they could build a wall here. Sure, there was some construction happening, but my city is barely old enough to be on the map. There's always construction going on. Oh God, how could I have not noticed this? Sorry, I'm still in shock right now. I'll try to refocus. Breathing, okay. This wall looks to be about 5 stories tall with regularly placed floodlights. It looks like it's made of long panels like aluminum siding, which I assume they chose so they could assemble it quickly. I didn't follow it all the way around, but after jogging along the main road for about a half hour, I decided it was reasonable to assume that it encircled the entire city. I got as close as I could, but after a few minutes of trying to find a good place to take pictures, 2 men in military uniforms patrolling along the road shooed me away and threatened to take my phone away if I didn't shut it off. I jogged nervously back towards my apartment. On top of a bridge over the road, I noticed another police device that wasn't there before. I think it must be monitoring the roads for the quarantine. They are totally deserted now, which is completely unheard of, even at this time of night. I noticed a few more CCTV installations as I made my way back, and I also realized that I had pulled the hood of my running jacket up in a subconscious effort to cover my face. When I reached my street, I saw 2 police cars that weren't there when I left. I got out my phone and took a couple pictures, and almost instantaneously 2 policemen opened the doors and got out of the cars. I turned and started to head towards the doors of my apartment, but thought better of it. I didn't want them to know exactly where I lived, so I kept going, trying to jog past them. One of the policemen yelled to get my attention and told me to stop. My skin turned to goose flesh and I froze. I turned around and gave them my best smile. They asked me a few questions like, what was I doing out so late? It's barely past midnight, it's not that late. And why was I taking pictures? I didn't have a good answer for that one. And whether or not I had any identification on me, which I didn't. I tried to keep the nervous stammering down to a minimum, but I'm sure that it was obvious I wasn't keeping my cool. Regardless, they told me goodnight after a few minutes and I walked slowly around the block. I peeked down the street and noticed they were still there, so I went to the 7-Eleven the next block over, which was thankfully open during times of crisis, and I had a beer and a smoke at one of the outdoor tables. After an hour had passed, I assumed it was safe to go ahead and head home. I turned away from the CCTV and once again peered cautiously down the street. Blissfully empty. Thank God. Not wanting to chance it, I sprinted to my apartment and ran up the stairs. I just want to know what's going on around here. People need to know. The Korean government has been mum about the outbreak from the get-go. They've been deliberately concealing information about the location of patients, under the ruse that they're trying to prevent hysteria. They keep reiterating that the number of infected is low, that the disease hasn't mutated, that it's very hard to spread from person to person. But if they built a wall around us, I don't know what I should believe. I contacted several news agencies, but there's no way that they'll report it if the government is pressuring them to keep quiet. Now that the Western world has woken up, maybe this will get traction and someone with more clout than I can investigate what's going on. Because hell, I'm not sure how long we're all supposed to just stay calm. Today I woke up to an alert message that the city was under voluntary quarantine and that my cell phone was being used to track my location. I typed the message into Google Translate just to make sure I wasn't going crazy, and it confirmed that I had it right. Voluntary quarantine? What the hell is voluntary about a wall guarded by soldiers? And now they're tracking me, tracking everyone? I want to turn my phone off, but I don't want to cut off the only way I can communicate with people outside when I'm not at my computer. As a precaution, I'm leaving it in my apartment when I go out to look at the wall so that I, hopefully, don't arouse too much suspicion. Unfortunately, that means no more pictures for now. Still haven't heard anything from the news yet or our local government. The moms in our school's cacao group are abuzz with chatter. Somehow they always seem to know information before the rest of us. As a matter of fact, it was through them that I found out on the first day of the outbreak that Patient Zero was from our city, a full week before that information was publicly released. So I've been trying to read everything that gets posted, which, given myself rudimentary Korean, is easier said than done. Now, this information right here is from a second-hand source. But I read in that group that one of the moms was a friend of a nurse who worked in the hospital Patient Zero went to, which is only about a 15 minutes walk from my apartment. The whole staff and all the patients had been quarantined in the hospital for almost a week. The mom from the group wrote that the nurse had confided in her friend that the South Korean government was covering up the facts in order to prevent mass hysteria. She claimed that the assurances that the virus had an identical genome as the MERS in the Middle East was false, that it had mutated and become more infectious just like SARS did in Beijing in 2002. It didn't need close, extended contact to infect anymore. Now maybe it was airborne, or it stayed alive longer on surfaces. I don't know the specifics, but whatever the hell it is, it seems like it's gotten dangerous enough that the government felt like they needed a wall in an entire city to keep everybody from leaving. Now, I'm no hypochondriac, but when I read this, I suddenly felt my throat tighten, and it became hard to breathe. I tried to exhale but coughed instead. In a moment of panic, I thought that I must be infected too. I felt my forehead for forever but couldn't tell. The words, "no cure," kept echoing through my head. And it's got a 40% mortality rate? I didn't notice that I was clenching my fists with fear until my palms started bleeding from the bite of my nails. I'm embarrassed to say, I burst into tears. I wished that I could call my mother, but we left on bad terms and I haven't spoken to her in years. I want to see my friends, but what if they're all infected? I curled into a ball and cried for maybe a half an hour before finally regaining my composure. I'm not infected. I'm not infected. There's no way I can be infected. I cannot be infected. I've been wearing a mask the entire time since this thing started. A mask doesn't do shit unless it's airtight. And I've been washing my hands religiously, but almost all the public bathrooms use communal bar soap and towels. I used hand sanitizer until my skin started to crack. How do you know you didn't just touch your face though for a second, I thought. I haven't had close contact with anyone exhibiting symptoms, but the population density of this place is through the roof. 2 to 14 days. That's how long it takes for the symptoms to start showing. 2 to 14 days. I can't be infected, right? For those of you unaware, MERS stands for Middle East Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus. It's a disease that originated in the Middle East, but spread to South Korea through a single man last week. It has a near 40% fatality rate. There is no cure or vaccine. So far, the stores are all still open. The streets are mostly deserted, and the few people I see walking around are all wearing masks, as if that could protect them against this. Well, let them walk in blissful ignorance. I stopped wearing mine, and each person that I passed gave me a lingering glance, a glance full of worry, concern, or fear. I noticed that we all have started to speed up unconsciously whenever nearing another person, as though to minimize possible contact as much as possible. The people rushed by, but their glances stayed, and someone had mentioned zombies. I stocked up on water, a variety of dried beans and rice at the biggest store in the city. All the public transportation has been stopped, so I had to lug my heavy bag from the supermarket on foot. Everything was eerily quiet. They'd even turned off the fake frogs croaking and birds singing, which usually chirped from the myriad speakers hidden somewhere in foliage. On my way, a police car with a mounted camera and speaker slowly drove by. It looped in an announcement made in a deep, male voice, and it said, "The city has been placed under voluntary quarantine. At this time, the government has recommended that no travel be allowed into or out of the city. We expect the quarantine to last no longer than 30 days. We appreciate your cooperation." The car rolled slowly by, taking the repeating announcement with it. "We appreciate your cooperation. We appreciate your cooperation. We appreciate your cooperation." I heard a distant scream. Startled, I looked up to see a bird swooping down in the air next to one of the tallest buildings in the city. The bird tumbled, exposing 4 awkward wings that didn't look right, before disappearing behind another, shorter building. I coughed and dropped my bag. The first of the suicides had begun. 2 to 14 days. After yesterday's event, I was done. I walked home in a daze, only dimly aware of my surroundings. I tried not to think about what it would look like at the base of that building, but the images came to me unbidden. A splatter of red, pulverized bones, faces flattened against the pavement, brains squeezed out into a misshapen mass onto the ground. God, it's happening again. I already had 2 panic attacks last night, and I'm getting ready to have another. I haven't slept for more than a couple hours at a time since this whole thing started happening. All I want is to be able to shut my eyes without the images of death, that wall, and swirling inside my eyelids. But I doubt that's going to happen anytime soon. I woke up this morning still tired when I received another update from the government. It stated that the quarantine had become compulsory, and then gave a long list of inane precautions against getting the disease, such as not drinking camel milk or eating camel meat. I wanted to throw my phone across the room with frustration. "We thank you for your cooperation," I heard the man say again. From outside my window, I saw that building and closed the blinds. Still no mention of us in the news, or at least none that I can find. I'm convinced they must not be reporting the number of cases here. I hear whispers around town, throwing out numbers, 12 more infected, 20 people, then 30. 1 more dead, or 2 or 5. The local news has been funneling information about how to combat the disease and updates on the quarantine progress, but has only reiterated that the number of cases so far has not increased, and that all the current patients remain in stable condition. But what about the zombies? Where is that coming from? And the subtext here? "We don't trust you with the truth." I looked outside my window and sighed. Maybe they had a point. I also heard through the local news that many of the shops in town had been mandated to keep their doors open, I suppose in order to boost community morale. Well, thank God for that. I can now worry about being trapped in this cesspool of infection with an overpriced Starbucks latte in my hand. I wish I could say that I heroically explored the city searching for answers, challenging authority, and asserting my right to freedom, but instead I went to the convenience store, bought as much liquor as I could carry, and drank myself into a stupor in the middle of the afternoon. I passed out while binge-watching HBO shows on my laptop. The next day, I didn't make it out of my bed until noon. Every time I moved, I felt like I was going to be violently ill. I turned on the TV to hear the comforting sound of human voices, but hearing the local news reporting on 2 more suicides just made my stomach turn. I eventually managed to overcome the dizziness and brew a cup of coffee. The familiar smell and the warmth of the cup in my fingers did wonders for my spirit. I had just started to take a sip when the sound of my doorbell ringing startled me into spilling most of it all over the front of my shirt. I made it to the door after a long minute and glanced at the small screen, which showed the face of a masked Korean woman that I didn't recognize. I opened the door cautiously. When she saw my face, the woman knit her brows together in discomfort. She managed to communicate to me in broken English that she needed to take my temperature. I noticed then that she was wearing a long hospital-issued gown that cinched tightly at the wrists and ankles, and suddenly bile rose into my throat. She wanted to take my temperature? How much coffee had gotten into my mouth? Could that affect it? I tried to air out my mouth by opening it just a bit, hoping that she didn't notice. With a gloved hand, she placed a disposable thermometer under my tongue for what seemed like a long time. Afterwards, I couldn't read the thermometer or her inscrutable face when she examined it. She thanked me for my cooperation. Of course she did. I took that as my cue to shut the door, but I turned on the camera to see her making a note on her tablet. Then she moved off to the right, down the hallway. A moment later, I heard the next doorbell ring. There must have been 100 people around the city at that moment, intruding on the tenuous safety of our city's homes to check its residents for signs of the disease. I suppose the thought should have brought me comfort. By the time the late afternoon rolled around, I was getting restless. I hadn't left my apartment for a significant amount of time for almost 48 hours, and my tiny studio was starting to feel like a prison. Fearing the dangers of being out and exposed in the open city, I tried to go to the roof for a smoke, but the door had been padlocked. I held the cool metal between my fingers, and the implication sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. I guess I didn't have a choice but to leave. It's hard to imagine the town could be more deserted than 2 days ago, but it was. Central Park, normally so full of kids that you couldn't go 2 feet without nearly stepping on one, was completely empty. Not a single soul. Cars were left abandoned, some parked in the middle of the road. On my restless walk around town, I only saw 4 other people, and 2 doctors wearing masks. After about an hour, I returned to my apartment to drop my phone off before venturing towards the wall. I wandered on the main road until I found the gate. It was rather unimpressive compared to the rest of the wall. Basically a large hole protected by 2 of those long, thin barriers that go up and down, like the kind you'd see at the exit of a parking garage. If it weren't for the 2 police cars blocking the way, anyone with a sturdy car could just ram their way right on through. 3 men stood silent sentry at the gate, 2 in police uniforms and 1 in military garb. I sat down on a bus stop bench a comfortable distance away and smoked a pack of cigarettes, one right after the other. The guards noticed me, but they didn't do anything. We all just kind of watched each other for a long time. I had just lit up my last cigarette when I saw the guards suddenly snap to attention. I noticed motion in my periphery and turned to see a line of about 20 people, all wearing masks, walking single file down the center of the empty highway. They moved slowly and soundlessly, like a procession of ghosts. By the time they reached the gate, more guards had joined the 3, and together they formed a human barrier across the exit. The masked people fanned out and spread into a double line facing the guards. Both parties stood there, neither one making a move. I expected the masked people to break formation and run for the exit, but they stood stock still for over a minute. Finally, one of the military guards yelled something I didn't quite catch and stepped forward to dispel the small crowd. As though this were some unspoken signal, every single one of the masked people removed their masks in unison and dropped them on the ground. One of the policemen nearly tripped over his own feet as he backed up, touching his own mask as though trying to reassure himself that it was still there. The military man continued shouting, but the group remained frozen to the spot. They stared straight ahead, beyond the guards, beyond the wall. That night, a small riot erupted. A group of people torched a small shop, I assume owned by someone who had MRGs. The firemen reacted quickly and no one was hurt. Still, the charred remains served as a grim reminder of the desperate measures people take to regain some kind of semblance of control. In my nightmare last night, I dreamed that I was drowning. I woke up covered in a sheen of sweat, shivering despite my blankets. My lungs weren't happy with me for chain smoking that pack of cigarettes yesterday either, and drinking every night to just get to sleep had taken its toll on my body. I barely even felt human. Somehow I managed to roll out of bed, opened that stupid child-proof top on my bottle of Advil, and shook a few into my hand. After I took the pills, I laid back down for a short nap, hoping the medicine would kick in by the time I woke up. By noon, I was starting to feel like myself again. A rumor had been circulating around that, despite the government's assurance that the case numbers were stable, enough people had been brought to the hospitals to cause them to run out of room. Now, to find more bed space, the local clinics were becoming MERS sites, and unlike the hospitals, these clinics share their building space with restaurants or apartments or offices. I needed to see for myself what was happening. The hospital was only a short walk from my house. I left my cell phone at home, uncertain of the consequences of the government finding out I was dangerously close to an extra quarantine site. I stood on the sidewalk across the street from the hospital, watching. The windows were covered with plastic sheets and the area was cordoned off by red tape and caution signs. In only 5 minutes, I saw 2 ambulances arrive, and paramedics in heavy protective gear carried the patients into the hospital on a stretcher. Another ambulance sped away without its lights on. A man then came out from the hospital shortly after. He made eye contact, broke it immediately, and yelled at me to leave. I complied, but once I rounded the corner, I peeked back at the hospital again. The man was starting to take down the red tape. There are only 2 reasons I can think of to do that, and I can't imagine that there are no more cases of Mars. I started running. I sprinted, not caring about direction or distance, until my lungs started burning and I broke out into a fit of coughing. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing in between, dry heaving from fear. At that moment, I realized how alone I was. Alone, alone, alone. My heart was heavy, the silence filled with emptiness. God, it had already been nearly 3 days since I interacted with another person I knew. I picked myself up and made my way home. I thought I would go crazy if I couldn't talk to someone about this face to face. How many people had the virus? I couldn't be sure. How can I weigh my sanity against the risk of getting the disease? Once I got home, I stared at my phone for a full hour, deciding, then balking, then trying again, then hanging up. Finally, I dialed and let it ring. Anna picked up almost immediately, as though she too had been waiting by the phone. "Anna," I said hesitantly, "are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied quickly. "How about you?" "Yeah, I'm fine," I said. Neither of us knew how to fill in the pause or where to proceed. So much had happened. "Do you want to come over?" Thank God she asked first. Anna lived close by. When I arrived, she hurried me up the stairs, shooting furtive glances at the door to other apartments in her building. Once we reached her room, she let out a sigh of relief and removed her mask. We chatted for about an hour, sometimes mentioning the current events, sometimes skirting around them. We talked about the suicides. Her roof had also been blocked off. The rumors of infection numbers. The rumors of the zombies. I told her about the demonstration I'd seen in front of the wall's exit. "Want some water?" she asked. "I forgot to take my allergy pills," she said. "I didn't know that you had allergies," I said. "Yeah, I've had breathing problems the past few weeks. I finally went to the doctor and he told me that everything was just allergies. I couldn't believe it, but since I started taking them, I've been feeling much better," she said. She handed me a glass of water. I hesitated. "Anna, your doctor's at the hospital clinic, right?" She nodded. "How long have you been taking the pills?" I said. Her jaw went slack. She examined the floor carefully in silence, and I heard my voice become involuntarily more insistent. "Anna, when did you go to the doctor?" I said, again, more urgently. "When?" "About a week and a half ago," she said meekly. By the time she looked up, I already had one shoe on and one hand on the doorknob. "Wait," she started. I ignored her, pulled on my other shoe, and opened the door. "Wait," she yelled after me as the door closed. "I swear to God I feel fine," she shouted. 2 to 14 days. 2 to 14 days is all I could think about, and nothing else. I know now that we are never going to get out of here. I'm never going to get over that wall, and I'm never going to get out of here. 2 to 14 days.